Hagutavach. This Chazarah is dedicated to Lil Nishmas, my father, my teacher, who passed away this past second day of Rosh Chodesh Sheni. The Rebbe began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos Mevorchim Nissen. It is also Shabbos Parshas HaChodesh. Shabbos HaChodesh is usually either on Shabbos Mevorchim Nissen, or if Rosh Chodesh Nissen falls out on Shabbos, then we read Parshas HaChodesh on Rosh Chodesh Nissen. But the way the Kviyas is this year, it is Shabbos Mevorchim Nissen, and together with it, it is also Parshas HaChodesh. The Rebbe right away explained that this year, all of the inyanim regarding Parshas HaChodesh, as well as Pesach, are of extreme significance. Because Rosh Chodesh Nissen comes out on a Thursday. If Rosh Chodesh Nissen comes out on Thursday, that means that the first day Pesach will also come out on a Thursday. And this is exactly how it was when the Yidden left Mitzrayim. When the Yidden left Mitzrayim originally, the first year. This is how the Kviyas was, that Yud Dalet, 14 days in the month of Nissen, came out to be on a Wednesday. And Wednesday night to Thursday, that is when the Yidden were ate the Korban Pesach, and that is when they left Mitzrayim. So Mamela, we always keep on stressing, Kimei Tzeischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim Arenu Niflois, that the Niflois, the wonders which HaKadosh Baruch Hu will show when Mashiach will come, will be similar to those that were when we went out of Mitzrayim. And this is what we are hoping for constantly, for the coming of Mashiach, to live through the Kimei Tzeischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim Arenu Niflois. And here the Rebbe added a taich that when we say that the Nissim, the miracles and wonders which we're going to see by the coming of Mashiach, are Kimei Tzeischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim, are just like we went out of Mitzrayim. So the Rebbe taich that what we saw, what our ancestors lived through when we went out of Mitzrayim, is only a small part, does not come in any way to the great and outstanding miracles which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to perform when He's going to take us out of Golus. So it's extremely appropriate to talk about this inyan now, which we are constantly waiting for. And as the Gemara uses the expression Achishena, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will hasten the coming of Mashiach. So Rebbe says, in the Shiur of Achishena, let there be an Achishena in that. In other words, it's already the proper time for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to really rush the coming of Mashiach, and we should go through the Kimei Tzeischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim Arenu Niflois. This, the Rebbe says, applies to the whole idea of Rosh Chodesh Nissen, of the month of Nissen, as it is this year. So it's extremely appropriate to ask for Geula, to ask for the coming of Mashiach. Based on the teaching of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe teaches us a Medarf Leben mit der Zeit, which means we have to live with the time, and as later Rabbeim explained, that it means we have to take lessons and direction from the Parshas HaShavua. So today's Parsha is Parsha Shemini. If we begin learning the Parsha, and we read Vayhi Bayom HaShemini, so Rashi explains us the specialty of this Yom HaShemini, that the Yom HaShemini was an outstanding day. It was a very special day. And Rashi uses the expression Oisei Hayom, that day, the day of Yom HaShemini Lemiluyim, Notal Eser Atoros. That day took 10 Atoros. 10 Atoros would be 10 crowns. In other words, it's an extremely significant day. And here the Rebbe stresses the expression, every word in Chazal is extremely accurate. Chazal tell us the expression, Notal Eser Atoros. That day took the 10 crowns. What's the pshat it took? Sometimes the Rebbe says as an Indian, one is given something. We are given, we get it, we acquire it in different ways. Here, none of these expressions are used. Here the expression is notal. The day in itself is such a special day, and it's so outstanding, all the greatness of that day, that the day took In other words, it like automatically came to that day. This was the day, the 8th day of the dedication of the Mishkan, as we read in this week's Chazarah. This is the day that took the Eser HaTorah. In other words, it's an extremely different way. It's so obvious that this is a special day, and this day has a shaykhus to the Eser HaTorah that automatically by itself, Oisei Hayoim, not al Eser HaTorah, the day took the HaTorah. It didn't have to wait for it to be given. It didn't have to come in any other different way from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oisei Hayoim, not al Eser HaTorah. Here the Rebbe went into today's Shir and Rambam, talking about every Yid having a shaykhus to Torah. And at all times, every Yid has a shaykhus to Torah, and Torah unites all the Yidden. And as the Rebbe expressed himself, Chazal say, Le'nitna Torah elalase shalom ba'ilam. Torah was given to create peace in the world. Mela, what's the pshat? Torah creates peace. So the Rebbe teaches that when Yidden learn Torah, and learn Torah in unity, and learn Torah together, this leads to Avas Yisrael. This leads to unity amongst Yidden. So Mamela, this is how Torah brings Shalom Ba'il. So talking about the greatness of Torah, the Rebbe says we find in today's Shia the Rambam. If we learn Rambam 3, for those who learn 3 prakim a day, the Rebbe says it is in the last Perek of Hilchis Sefer Torah. And there the Rambam uses an expression regarding Torah. Rambam here talks about the greatness and the holiness, the sanctity that is involved in a Sefer Torah. And the Rambam tells us that Torah is Eid HaNe'eman, a true witness, L'chol Boi Olam. In other words, what is a living witness? How Yidden are associated, are part of the Rebbeinu Shel Olam and part of Torah. Yidden, Torah, and the Rebbeinu Shel Olam are united all in one. And Torah is the witness, Torah is the Eid HaNe'eman that this is so. The Rebbe later in the Farbrengen also got back to this Rambam, and this is the Rambam which he discussed in today's Farbrengen. But what we derive from the Rambam is how Torah is an Eid Ne'eman. And here the Rebbe says, we know Al Pi Torah, we always believe a witness. A witness, Al Pi Torah, has a very, very strong power. Everything is done and accomplished upon witness, unless a witness is proven wrong. We know we have in Gemara, there's the concept of Eidim Zaymimin, which means witness may be proven that they are liars. But as long as they are not proven Zaymimin, it is an accepted fact that whatever they declare, whatever they relate to us, we accept. Here the Rambam tells us that Torah is the Eid HaNe'eman. Torah in itself is a true witness, L'chol Boi Olam, for the entire world. And the Rambam quotes a pasuk, Shnema v'hoya sham b'chol ha'ed, that it will be there for you for a witness. And when we look into this halacha, the Rambam also tells us how we have to cherish the Sefer Torah. Hoya mahalach b'makom l'makom v'Sefer Torah imo. If we would go from place to place in a Sefer Torah with him, lo yeniach Sefer Torah b'teich hasak. You shouldn't put the Sefer Torah into a sack v'yinchenu al gabei hachamoyer and put it on a donkey v'yirkav alav. He should not do it that way, because it's not a respectful way to treat the Torah. Quoting this halacha in the Rambam, Rebbe also, being that the Rambam talks here about the chamoyer, about the donkey, so here the Rebbe also brought down the famous Chassidische Taich, the Taich from the Baal Shem Tov, on the pasuk of Kisire chamoyer seinacha. If you will see, the chamoyer of your enemy, Chovetz tachas masoyer, that's a pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim. If we see somebody who is not our friend, and we see him on the road and he's having problems with his donkey, in other words, that was the means of travel in those days, and whatever baggage he has is falling off the donkey. So you may think, you may not want to help him. So the Torah tells us, no, it is your obligation to help him, to stretch out an arm and help him and be of assistance to him. So there's a famous taich from the Baal Shem Tov, if you will see chamoyer, Baal Shem Tov taich is chamoyer, meaning the chumriyas and gashmiyas of the world, you will realize how the gashmiyas of the world is really your enemy and constantly creating interferences and obstacles for you to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Torah tells us, you may think that the right way is to turn away from gashmiyas and not have to do anything with gashmiyas whatsoever. In other words, divorce yourself from all the gashmiyas and deal only with ruchnis de kenyanim. So the Torah tells us no. Ozoif ta'azoif imoy. What does the Baal Shem Tov teach us? That the proper derech for Avodas Hashem is to take gashmiyas de kenyanim via all these gashmiyas de kenyanim, to utilize all this to serve the Rebbeinu Shalom and serve the Rebbeinu with the gashmiyas, not to put the gashmiyas on the side. Ozoif ta'azoif imoy. With these all gashmiyas de kenyanim that are in existence in the world, utilize all these inyanim for kedusha, and through them serve the Rebbeinu Shalom. Then the Rebbe continued, a little more specific regarding today's date, that today's day is 25 days in the month of Adar. Regarding 25 days in the month of Adar, we find the Gemara. There are two opinions in Gemara. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, there's a dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer claims that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world b'chav hei be'elul, 25 days in the month of Elul. That is when Hashem created the world. Amela, that is why we celebrate Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah, which is 6 days later, because that's the day when man was created, when Adam Rishon was created. Rabbi Yeshua disputes Rabbi Eliezer, and he claims that the world was created at the end of Adar. B'chav hei be'adar nivra ha'olam, and based on that, Adam Rishon was created according to the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, be'echad ben Nisan. The Rebbe says if we look through Svarim, and even Halachas Svarim, we will notice that the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer is accepted and the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua is accepted. Certain times, very obvious example, we follow Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah we follow according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. When do we celebrate our Rosh Hashanah? We celebrate it the 1st of Tishrei. So this is an indication that we follow the opinion that the world was created 25 days in Adar. However, the Rebbe says there are other halachas which are an expression that we follow the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua as well. We follow the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, who claims that the world was created at the end of Adar, Chav Hei B'Adar. How could this be? Especially when we're talking about the same issue, how can we accept both contradictory opinions and have certain halachas based on the fact that the world was created in Adar and other halachas based on the fact that the world was created in Elul? So the Rebbe explained, based on what is explained in Chassidus, that there is machshava and ma'aseh. There is thought and act. In machshava, HaKadosh Baruch Hu planned to create the world and made all his plans b'chav hei b'adar, 25 days in the month of Adar. However, in actuality, in ma'aseh, in reality, when was the world taka created? The world was created at the end of Elul. B'chav hei be'elul nivra. Amela comes out from that today is the day when the decision for the creation of the world was made. Mela, the Rebbe concluded, being that all positive inyanim don't have to remain in thought only, in machshava only, but have to come down to ma'aseh, have to come down to act. So Mela, what we have to accomplish with today's day is to bring into ma'aseh, to bring into act. What was the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world? The reason of HaKadosh Baruch Hu creating the world was L'aseh lo yizbarech dira b'tachtonim, to make the world a world suitable for the Rebbeinu Shalom. So being that today is the day when this decision was made and thought, we now have to see to bring this thought into a reality. In other words, as far as we're concerned, we have to walk away from today's day with a decision how to bring about the idea of which HaKadosh Baruch Hu's initial intention was, of creating the world. This is what we have to fulfill, and stress more important, and with with more inspiration and with more with more dedication as of today's day. Because this is the suitable day for it, because today was the day when HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of had the final decision for Bria Yisrael, for the creation of the world. As mentioned already last week, the Rebbe instituted a new custom when he picks the Rashi, which Rashi he discusses in the Farbrengen, that the Rebbe asked that in the weekly publications which are published by the various yeshivas, in Ha'aretz Ubiyurem, Ha'aretz Atmimim, with all different titles, that questions in the Rashi should be discussed, should be raised there. And the Rebbe selects from those questions that are raised in these periodicals, in these publications, these are the questions which the Rebbe discusses in the Farbrengen, and also gives an interpretation and an answer on them. In today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe discussed two Rashis, both in Parsha Shemini. First one is in Kapitel Yud Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. That is the first Pasuk in Shishi. Pasuk tells us, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron. Hashem spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, Leimer Aleim, to relate to them. And the Pasuk goes on, Dabru, plural. Not daber, dabru. We'll get to that in a minute. El Bnei Yisrael talk to the Yidden Leimer as follows, and here we have all the dinim of the chayes and the behemoths, what we are permitted to eat and what we are prohibited to eat. If we were to look into Rashi here, Rashi tells us, El Moshe vel Aaron, quoting the words that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe and Aaron. Rashi says, whom did he really speak to? He spoke to Moshe. Omar, he spoke to Moshe, Sheyoymar la'Aaron, that Moshe should relate it to Aaron. So what is Rashi really telling us? Not that the Rabbeinu Shalom spoke to Moshe and to Aaron together, but that the Rabbeinu Shalom spoke to Moshe, told Moshe to relate it to Aaron, and also to relate it to Klal Yisrael. If we were to look through Chumashim, we find this inyan discussed many times in the Torah, where certain times the Pasuk uses the expression that the Rabbeinu Shalom spoke to Moshe, and many a times the Pasuk uses the expression that the Rabbeinu Shalom spoke to Aaron. So the question is, whom did he really speak to? Did he speak to both? Did he speak to one of them? What really happened? So the Pasuk is a Rashi, which is based on a Chazal, that it's mentioned 13 times in the Torah that the Rebbe spoke to both of them. 13 times it's mentioned in the Torah that the Rebbe spoke to one of them. So Rashi tells us that really the Rabbeinu Shalom spoke always to Moshe, and Moshe was the one to relate it to Aaron. So we know this already from Chumash. And the child who is following Chumash is well familiar with the pattern and has learned this in Rashi. So the question arises, why is there a need here in this pasuk again to stress that the Rebbeinu Shalom spoke to Moshe and told Moshe to relate it to Aaron? So the Rebbe explained that the reason for it is because when we look into this pasuk, we will notice a few exceptional things here. And this is what causes Rashi to explain it here again, though it may be familiar to the child from previous Chumash learning as well. Pasuk says, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron, Leimer aleim. Not the usual Leimer which we always find in the Torah. Here, usually the expression would be Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron Leimer, as follows to relate. Here the word aleihem is added. Aleihem means Leimer aleim, to say to them. So we right away have some sort of an indication that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is talking to Moshe and Aaron together, and they should Leimer aleim, related to whom? To all of Klal Yisrael. This is not enough. Let us look at the beginning of Pasuk Beis. Pasuk Beis begins, Dabru, speak, plurally. Who plurally? Obviously we would learn it means Moshe and Aaron. Both of you speak plurally El B'nai Yisrael to the Yidden as follows. Memela. Being that here in these psukim we have some sort of an indication which we may think that here the Rabbeinu Shalom is speaking to Moshe and to Aaron together. That is why Rashi here is telling us again, you should know HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe, and Moshe was the one that related it to Aaron. Even though it is mentioned the Aleim, and even though it is mentioned the Dabru. That's the Nayis. Though the Pasuk says Aleim, and though the Chiddush, something new, that is why Rashi has to say it here. If not for the Aleim, and if not for the Dabru, then there would be no need for Rashi to say it here. Because we would know it as we learn all over in Chumash. All over in Chumash we know when it is mentioned that the Rabbeinu Shalom speaks to Moshe and to Aaron, he's really not speaking to both of them. He's speaking to Moshe, that Moshe should relate to Aaron. In Kisisa there's a long Rashi which tells us the Seder, the schedule, the routine, how it would be when Moshe would teach Torah. First Moshe would hear from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Then he would teach it to his brother Aaron. Then it would go to Aaron's children. So here, being that there are certain ribuyim, as the Rabbi used the expression, certain extra words here in these pasuk, words which obviously seem extra, and these words may be some sort of an indication that the Rabbeinu Shalom is speaking to Moshe and to Aaron. That is why Rashi here is reminding us that here it is like all over, and the Rabbeinu Shalom is speaking only to Moshe. The Rebbe also did mention, especially if we look back into Chumash, into Revi in this week's Seder, Revi has Vayidaber Moshe spoke El Aaron Ve'Elazar Ve'Elisama, and he spoke to, not only did he speak to Aaron, but he spoke to Aaron's children as well, because this was after the incident with Nadav Avihu. So Mamela, here there's a stress, there's an extra stress in the pasuk that here Moshe, the Rabbeinu Shalom is talking only to Moshe, not to Moshe and Aaron, and Aaron's children neither. Only first Moshe, and Moshe is relating to Aaron. Another inyan which the Rebbe raised, another question in this week's Rashi, which is also discussed in the Aras HaTmimim, is a Rashi in pasuk in Kapitel Yud Aleph, pasuk Chof Aleph, where the pasuk tells us, this is what we are permitted to eat, mikol sheret from all the creatures, ha'hilech al arba, that walk on four, anshaloi kra'ayim ima laraglov lenata behena la'aretz. So if we look into Rashi, there's a very long Rashi in pasuk Chof Aleph, mima laraglov, and Rashi gives us a lengthy description about the creatures which we are permitted to eat and which we are not allowed to eat. And Rashi concludes, the kol simonim halalu, he gave us various simonim, mitzuyim ba'isen shebein eseinu, are found in those creatures which are amongst us in the countries where Rashi lived. Aval, Rashi says, yesh sherosh and aroch, there's some that have a long head, v'yesh shein lahem zonov, and they don't have a tail, v'tzorich sheyehei shemoi chagov, and they still have to be called a chagov. Chagov is a grasshopper. And then Rashi says, and we really do not know to differentiate amongst them which are the kosher grasshoppers and which are not the kosher grasshoppers. So the Rebbe raised a very obvious question. Rashi is learning Chumash with a child. He's learning Chumash with a 5-year-old. 5-year-old is learning the pasuk, and he's going through the pasuk very simple. That there are those creatures which we are allowed to eat, and there are those creatures which we're not allowed to eat. So Rashi gets involved in a whole lengthy explanation of telling us different types of simanim, different types of indications, how to be able to verify and identify which is a kosher creature and which isn't. Rabbi says Rashi is not a Shulchan Aruch. This is something which belongs into the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, Yeridei, it would have makes sense that this should be discussed there. Why is this discussed here in a Rashi and Chumash? So the Rebbe explained, Rashi is talking to the child who's learning this Chumash. However, there are certain countries, the Rebbe says, it seems like in the generation of Rashi, in Egypt, for example, and in other countries,
Mention Yerushalayim.
Could be. these insects were eaten. Some countries they're not eaten at all. But there's some countries where these insects are eaten. Memela, there's an inyan of la'afrushe me'isura. When we see somebody doing an issa, we have to go out of our way to stop him and prevent him from it, that he should not do this issa. He should not be over on it, on a mitzvah saseh or a mitzvah lo yisaseh. So the child who's learning Chumash, Rashi was afraid, perhaps after he will finish the pasuk Chumash, he may walk away, and as a result of the pasuk, try to figure out which creatures he's allowed to eat and which creatures he's not allowed to eat. He may wind up eating those creatures which we are prohibited to eat. So that is why Rashi finds it important. True, Rashi is not a Shulchan Aruch, but at the same time, Rashi's inyan is Rashi's teaching Talmidim. Rashi has his disciples who he's teaching, and Rashi's inyan is to prevent his disciples from being either an anissa. And that is why Rashi tells us you should know that there are general rules, which creatures are allowed to be eaten, which are not allowed to be eaten, and don't, after learning a pasuk chumash, don't go away and wind up eating a creature which is treif, which we're not allowed to eat. So Rashi is giving us a general rule. We do not know to identify. We are not baki. In other words, we are not well versed in identifying which creatures we are allowed to eat and which creatures we're not allowed to eat. So therefore, Rashi says, my disciple. In other words, he's addressing himself to his Talmud. Stay away from it. Don't eat it. Though you are learning the pasuk, and where the pasuk tells us which creatures we are allowed to eat, but being that there are such differences, and they may lead to problems, and one chas v'shalom may be nichshal, and may wind up eating a treif creature, which he will be Eivan and Nisam and Atayra. So that is why Rashi finds it important to give us the general klolim and the general rules, and he concludes, we don't know to make the difference. So therefore my student, therefore my child who's learning, Rashi says to him, be careful, don't eat it. The Rebbe discussed the Rambam, which we mentioned earlier, and prior to that the Rebbe again spoke about the importance of making siyumim for the Rambam. In many cities, many communities, it was already done, and some it is being done this week and in the nearby weeks. But even for those places who already made the siyum, the Rebbe spoke last week, as the Rebbe expressed himself last week, it is a bakosha nafshis, a sincere request, which the Rebbe is requesting that in all the cities and all over where a Siyum Rambam took place, also a publication should be made together with the Siyum Rambam, and the publication should consist of inyonim on the Rambam, and inyonim al have a shaykhs to halachas, which is the Rambam Sefer. The Rambam Sefer is halachas, as the Rambam himself uses the expression. The Rebbe also requests that, being that Erev Pesach is the Rambam's birthday, so that all these publications should be out and available for the Rambam's birthday, so but then we should be able to have access to these publications and learn in it. And this is another inyan in the spreading of Torah Bechlal and the Torah of the Rambam Befrat. As the Rebbe mentioned, Moshe ad Moshe likam ke Moshe, from Moshe Rabbeinu. This is a famous quotation, that from Moshe Rabbeinu till Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, which is the Rambam, there was no one as great as the Rambam. And in fact, the Rebbe added on that, being that we are still in the month of Adar, and we are about to enter the month of Nisan. The month of Adar is a month of Laihudim, Haisa, Oira, V'Simcha, V'Sasa, and V'Yikar, as the Megillah tells us the Pasuk. And Chazal interpret, what does it mean that the Yidden had light? What do we mean by Oira, light? So Chazal say, Oira zu Torah. What is Lichtigkeit for a Yid? Lichtigkeit for a Yid is Torah. So Mamela, when is there a more suitable time to get involved in additional publications that have to do with Inyanim and Torah? That is in the month of Adar. Now that we are entering the month of Nisan, Nisan is the month of Geula, a month of going out of Golus, a month of redemption. We were redeemed out of Mitzrayim, we were taken out of Mitzrayim. Chazal tell us, Ein lecha ben chayren ela misha isich b'Torah. Who is considered a true, free person, a person who is not enslaved, one who is dwelling in Torah? So Mele the Rebbe says, now we are in such time, we're in the month of Adar, and we're going into the month of Nisan. These are the most suitable times to be involved in learning of Torah. Mele, he's again requesting and urging everybody to please get involved in every community, in every city, wherever there was a Siyam Rambam, to also get involved in making a publication with having people write in Yonim and Torah that have a shaykhs to the Rambam and have a shaykhs to Halacha, and this again should be published before the Rambam's birthday, which is Erev Pesach. The Rebbe also added on that Torah is something which has a shaykhs to every Yid. Men have a shaykhs to Torah, women have a shaykhs to Torah, and children have a shaykhs to Torah. Everyone has a shaykhs to Torah. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Moirasha kehilas Yaakov. Torah is an inheritance. Yidden have inherited Torah. A child could be a little youngster, could also inherit. There's no special qualifications needed for one to inherit. Memela, when we're talking about Yidden, anyone who's only a member of Klal Yisrael has a shaykhs to Torah. Regarding women learning Torah, so there's halacha. Halacha tells us as follows, that anything which deals with the mitzvahs, which women are also obligated to fulfill, these in Yonim and Torah, they also have to learn. Mele the Rebbe says, when we're talking about the Sefer Hamada in the Rambam, which is the first Sefer in the Rambam, there are many in Yonim here that have a shaykhs to women. Especially when we're talking about the Yesodei HaTorah, the beginning of the Rambam, which is the mitzvahs of Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, to be God-fearing and loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All of these inyanim, women are obligated to, just as equal as men. The Mele the Rebbe urged that women also can take part in these publications, as the Gemara tells us that women have a chelek in limud Torah by the fact that they encourage their husbands to learn Torah and they wait for their husbands to come back from shiurim and Torah and so forth. The woman can play an active role in the shiurim and Torah of her husband. So Mamela, when we're talking about these publications, the Rebbe says it is also the Noshim B'Yisrael that can also play a major role by seeing to it that their husbands are involved in these inyanim and B'chlal learn Torah in general and learn the Shiurim and Rambam in particular. And when we're talking about these inyanim as well, the publications which have a shaykhs to the inyanim of the Rambam, which will all be published until Erev Pesach. Regarding the halach in the Rambam, which we mentioned before, where the Rambam tells us that the Torah is an aid, Torah is a witness, aid hanemon l'chol bo yolam. The Rebbe raised a very obvious question. We know there are other mitzvahs that are a witness. Tefillin. Tefillin is also an ois, a sign, a witness. In fact, Shabbos is also a witness. That is why we don't put on tefillin on Shabbos, the Gemara says, because tefillin is a witness and Shabbos is a witness, so there's no need for both of them at the same time. And when the Rambam discusses the halachas of tefillin or the halachas of Shabbos, the Rambam does not mention that tefillin or Shabbos is an aid, is a witness, a living monument, a living witness on the relationship and the closeness between Yidden and the Rabbeinu Shalom. It is only when the Rambam discusses the halachas of Sefer Torah, that is when the Rambam quotes this Chazal that Torah is an aid haneman l'chol bo yolam. That is one question which the Rebbe raised. Another question which the Rebbe raised in this Rambam is there is halacha in Perek Zayin of Hilchas Sefer Torah. Actually, it's the first Perek of Hilchas Sefer Torah. The halachas of Sefer Torah come in continuation with the halachas of mezuzah, and also with the halachas of tefillin. Tefillin, mezuzah, Sefer Torah. So the counting of the prakim goes in one continuity. So the dinim of Sefer Torah really begin in the 7th Perek after the halachas of mezuzah. So as far as Sefer Torah, it's really the first. But it's considered the 7th Perek of all these inyanim, of all the things which had to be written with various halachas, which is tefillin, mezuzah, and Sefer Torah. Here there's a halach in the Rambam. Nizdamna loy teva b'shtei yosiyas. If the Sefer is writing the Sefer Torah, came across a word which this word only has 2 letters. Short word. Lo yizrekena bein adafin. So the halacha is he's not allowed to squeeze this word in between 2 lines. Elo yachzir l'tchilas hashita. He has to go back to the beginning of the line. Now, we also have in the 10th Perik of the Rambam tells us there are 20 things. Nimtza Aslomei. This is how the Rambam begins Perik Yud. There are 20 things, 20 halachas, which if we do not miss out, which if we miss out one of these 20, the Sefer Torah is a apostle of Sefer Torah. And the Rambam tells us which the 20 are. Starts off, if it was written on a parchment of a non-kosher behemoth, if it was written on a parchment from a kosher behemoth, but the parchment was not worked out properly as it's supposed to, al pi halacha, it was worked out, but not with the intention of this parchment being used l'shem Sefer Torah. And Rambam goes on telling us 20 halachas which are ma'akev, which means which hold back. If any of these halachas are lacking in the writing of the Sefer Torah is possible. So the Rebbe asks, why doesn't the Rambam also mention here this halacha which we just said, that if he would take a 2-letter word and squeeze it in between the 2 lines, he would passel the Sefer Torah? Why doesn't the Rambam mention this when he tells us this general number of 20 halachas which are negeya to the kashchus of the Sefer Torah? The Rebbe says this kasha is asked by Mefarshei HaRambam, by the commentaries of the Rambam, and especially that being that this is a halacha which the Rambam discusses in the first perik of halachas of Sefer Torah, this shows us the importance of this halacha. The Rebbe says that there is a Godel b'Yisrael, one of the commentaries on the Rambam, that wants to say the reason the Rambam does not repeat this halacha now when he's discussing the 20 inyonim which are negeya to the kashrus of the Sefer Torah, and if one of them would be lacking, the Sefer Torah is not a kosher Sefer Torah. The Rebbe says that commentary in the Rambam says that when the Rambam wrote these 20 halachas, he forgot about that halach. The Rebbe says this is something which we cannot accept. True, the Rebbe says the one who's saying this is a Godel b'Yisrael, who is a commentary in the Rambam and does give this interpretation, but we cannot satisfy ourselves with the teretz that the Rambam, when he wrote a few prakim further, and he's listing in a numerical sequence all the 20 inyanim, which if one of them would be lacking, the Sefer Torah is not kosher, so he missed out, there's really 21 things, and the Rambam missed it out because he forgot it. We cannot accept such type of interpretation. So the Rebbe says, first of all, we notice in the Rambam that there's certain numbers which the Rambam sort of uses. Here the Rambam gives us an expression, there are 20 things which are negeya for the kashrus of a Sefer Torah. Why does the Rambam mention number 20? I mean, we could count them and we'll find the 20. Truth is, there's another Rambam which the Rebbe once discussed at length, and he referred to it today very briefly, where the Rambam is talking about the Mizbeach in the Beis HaMikdash. And there the Rambam tells us that there are 14 inyanim that are negeya. And then the Rebbe explained that the Rambam sort of had a number 14 was dear to him. It was the Yad HaChazaka. The Rambam itself consists of 14 Svarim. So that is why the Rambam had an opportunity to stress number 14, he did it. Same the Rebbe says is with number 20 for whatever reason. And number 10 is also a number which we find in the Rambam, that the Rambam uses these numbers when he gives general rules of many inyanim which can fall into 10 inyanim or 20 inyanim or 14 inyanim. In fact, the Rebbe claims, if not so, the first 3 halachas really could have been combined into one. The fact that it has to be, we're talking about the parchment which the Sefer Torah is written on. So the parchment has to be from a kosher behemoth. It also has to be worked out well, and worked out with the intention of a Sefer Torah. All this could really be said in one sentence. And the Rambam is not saying it in one sentence. The Rambam is saying it in 3 separate, the Elohim, these are the 20 things which are negeya, and he says each one of them separately. So we see that somehow the Rambam here wanted, his intention was to have 20 inyanim which are negeya for the kashrus of a Sefer Torah. The fact why Taki does not bring this halacha which he brought previously regarding a two-letter word, that it's not allowed to be squeezed in anywhere, this, the Rebbe says, is probably included in one of the other klolim which the Rambam says, in one of the other rules. The Rambam tells us, we know that the Sefer Torah is written constantly, same type of margin lines. The line begins at the right side and ends at the left side, one below the other. However, there are exceptions. The Shira Oz Yashir, the way it is written, it's written with a lot of spaces in between. Same thing, the Shira Hazinu also has a lot of spaces between the words. So there are two klolim here in the Rambam. Sheshina Tzuras Hashiros. If one will change the format, the layout of the Shira in the Rambam. Or Shekosav B'Sha'ar Aksav Kishira. He would write other Parshias in the Torah the same way as the Shira is written. Any one of these makes the Sefer Torah apostle. So we already know that the Sefer Torah has to be written regular full lines, one after another, beginning at the right side, one below the other, and ending at the left side, one below the other, except where there's a psucha nestuma, which means the end of a parsha, which we're not getting into now, which the Rambam also mentions as the 17th rule. Memela, the Rebbe says, once we have these rules clear, it is also self-explanatory that if one would take and fill in a two-letter word between two lines, he will pass the Sefer Torah. Why? Because the Sefer Torah has to be written not like by the Shira, but like regular lines in the Sefer Torah, which means regular complete lines. So if he's going to put a word between the two lines, let it even be only a brief word, a small word, let it even be only a two-letter word, he will still pass the Sefer Torah. So Memela, when the Rambam gives us these 20 inyanim, which are negated to the kashrus of the Sefer Torah, and if one of them would be lacking, the Rambam says the Sefer Torah is pasul, it also includes this halacha which we just mentioned, that he's not allowed to take a two-letter word and squeeze it in between two lines.
It would be obvious. It
would be obvious that the lines are not kosher.
You have to mention it before
Before he's talking more details.
Oh, okay.
Now that he's giving 20 general rules, what makes a kosher a Sefer Torah, this is also. The Rebbe referred to a Lekutei Levi Yitzchak, as he always does, and every Shabbos to Farbrengen, a Zohar, which is a Zohar in Parsha Shemini. A Zohar in Parsha Shemini, which talks about Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak Posach, and the Rebbe, when he always explains the Zohars, always takes and gives this type of an introduction today as well. Rebbe says that his father wrote very brief. However, like every Indian in Torah, there is a hayrah, there is a lesson in Avodas Hashem, which we are supposed to derive from it, though his father did not spell it out. It's probably known to everybody, but let's just mention it again. The Rebbe once told at length how the circumstances his father wrote this commentary. His father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, was sent away to deep Russia for being involved in spreading Yiddishkeit and upkeeping Yiddishkeit, and he did not have many svarim with him. He managed to take along with him a set of Zohars, and he also had a Tanya with him. He did not have no pen, he did not have no pencils. However, his mother, the Rebbe's mother, his Rebbetzin, would come to visit him, would be allowed to visit him from time to time. And when she would visit him, she would bring him along ink which she manufactured herself, man-made ink which she made from certain various grasses, which she knew herself how to manufacture this ink. And she would smuggle this ink into him, and with this ink, he, being in far, far away Siberia, would write these commentaries on the set of Zohar which he had with him, as well as on the Tanya which he had with him. And Mamela, the Rebbe many times stresses that his father wrote very brief, and the Inyanim, which we can take out, derive, Hayrois, lessons in Avodas Hashem, this he left up to us like every Inyan in Torah, we're always supposed to derive a lesson in Avodas Hashem from it. So here he discusses an Inyan based on the pasuk of Ahi Bayom Shemini. He quotes the Tana Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak Pasach, this is the expression of the Zohar. And he explains that Yitzchak is begematria 8 times Shem Havaya. The Shem HaVakadosh Baruch Hu, Yud Kei Vav Kei, which in numeric value is 26, 8 times 26 will be the same total as Yitzchak. He also discusses here an union of Uriel, the name Uriel, which is 8 times the Shem Kael. There's the Shem, there are various Shemes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's the Shem Kael, and Shem Kael has an union of Chesed. Shem Kael b'Chesed, it is explained in Chassidus. There's Chesed and there's Gevura, and we know that Yitzchak's union is Gevura, power, strength. We know when Chassidus discusses the difference, Chassidus and Kabbalah, the difference of the Ovis, it is explained that Avram's union was Chesed, as opposed to Yitzchak, whose derech, whose method of Avodas Hashem was through the channel of Gevura, of power, of strength. The Mela, when we're talking here of Yitzchak, it's also an inyan of Gevura. This is already an inyan which is explained here in the Zohar. What does it negate to us when we are looking for a lesson of Avodas Hashem? Here the Rebbe explains that each and every one of us has various expressions. People have expressions of chesed, expressions of kindness, and there's expressions of gevura, expressions of power within a person. So we are told that what is the inyan of a Yid, even though he has these, not even though, based on the fact that we all have these midos within us, that it is our inyan that these midos should all be utilized for Avodas Hashem to serve the Rebishter. There's serving the Rebishter through midas HaChesed, and they're serving the Rebishter through midas HaGevura. So here we are told that the inyan of Yitzchak, which is Gevura, is begematria ches ponim Shem Havaya. Shem Havaya is Getlichkeit, it's the inyan of the Rebishter. So we can serve the Rebishter and relate to the Rebishter and serve him by utilizing all our strengths and all our koiches and all the different moods which we have and talents, whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us, everything can be utilized for the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Mela, the same when the person has a koyach of gevura, a koyach of power and strength, this too can be utilized for gevura as far as serving the Rebishter, serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe again reminded that being that we are Shabbos Mevorchim Nissen, and we are a short time before Pesach, he's reminding everybody to utilize the leftover time until Pesach for all the miftzayim that have to be done for Pesach, familiarizing Yidden with the halachas of Pesach, getting matzah to Yidden, and all other inyanim which have a shaychus to Pesach, and all of this should be done, as the Rebbe expressed himself, metoich simcha v'tuv lavav, with a happy and joyful heart and with a lot of happiness.